A sanctuary for new life transforms into a prison when a pregnant woman, confined to strict bed rest, is brutally assaulted with a belt by her husband's mistress, right in her hospital bed at her most defenseless moment. What starts as emotional cruelty quickly escalates into a physical betrayal so severe it sends the fetal heart monitor into a panic and leaves the ward stunned. The husband, Brian, does not intervene. He watches with cold apathy. The mistress believes her violence will silence the truth, but a desperate cry summons the one man they treated like a useless old man, her father, Lawrence. He arrives not with rage, but with a terrifying calm, revealing he is the very owner of the ground they stand on. He destroys their lives without lifting a finger. Stop. Before we see the father destroy them, I have a question for you. Do you think a man who watches his pregnant wife get beaten deserves any forgiveness? Type "hell no" in the comments if you think he deserves to lose everything. I'm reading your replies. Now, let's see how he pays for it. Sofia Palacios lay perfectly still on the stiff hospital mattress, her body angled slightly to alleviate the pressure on her spine. She was heavily pregnant, admitted days prior due to complications that demanded absolute stillness. The diagnosis was a terrified warning: high-risk pregnancy induced by chronic stress, requiring constant fetal monitoring and zero agitation. The room was sterile and quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies fear. The blinds were drawn, casting a dim, clinical shadow across the white walls. To her right, a heart monitor emitted a rhythmic electronic beep, 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 the only sound tethering her to the reality that her baby was still fighting inside her. Sofia kept one hand protectively over her swollen stomach. She didn't press down, she just held it there, needing the tactile reassurance. Her hospital gown was a faded utilitarian print, loose around her frame, but unable to hide the IV drip taped to her hand and the identification band circling her wrist. Her hair was messy, tied back in a loose, fraying knot, and her face bore the gray pallor of exhaustion. She looked like a woman who hadn't known peace in months. The stress wasn't just medical, it was personal. Her husband, Brian, had become a ghost in their own home. His excuses were flimsy, his eyes cold, and his affection non-existent. And then there were the rumors of a woman named Eloise, a name that had begun to haunt Sofia's peripheral vision like a bad omen. Sofia had swallowed her suspicions, believing that keeping the peace was the only way to protect the life growing inside her. She was wrong. A nurse had just checked her vitals and exited the room, the soft whoosh of the pneumatic door signaling solitude. Sofia exhaled a shaky breath, trying to lower her own heart rate to match the steady rhythm of the machine. Inhale, exhale, for the baby. The door handle turned again. Sofia turned her head, expecting the nurse to return with water. Instead, Brian walked in. But he wasn't alone. Eloise Vaughn stepped inside behind him. She was dressed in a flashy metallic blue dress that looked violently out of place against the sterile white of the hospital ward. Her hair was done, her presence commanding and arrogant. The contrast was sickening, the suffering bedridden wife versus the gleaming healthy mistress. Eloise closed the door with a confident click. Sofia's fingers gripped the thin hospital blanket until her knuckles turned white. Brian didn't look ashamed. He sneered. "Where have you been?" Sofia whispered, her voice cracking. Brian stepped aside, gesturing to the woman in the blue dress. "Stop whining, Sofia. I want you to meet my true love," he said, his voice devoid of empathy. Eloise stepped closer to the bed, her eyes scanning Sofia's vulnerable form with disgust. In her hand, she held a heavy black leather belt, unlooped and ready. She looked at the heart monitor, then down at Sofia. "Look at you," Eloise mocked, tapping the belt against her own palm. "Pathetic." The monitor's beeping sped up. The room felt too small. "You need to leave," Sophia managed to say, terror rising in her throat. "We aren't going anywhere," Eloise replied, raising the belt. "Brian thinks you need to be taught a lesson about holding him back." Brian just watched, arms crossed, as Eloise pulled her arm back. The door handle turned again. Sophia turned her head, expecting the nurse to return with water. Instead, Brian walked in. But he wasn't alone. Eloise Vaughn stepped inside behind him.
She was dressed in a flashy, metallic blue dress that looked violently out of place against the sterile white of the hospital ward. Her hair was done, her presence commanding and arrogant. The contrast was sickening. The suffering, bedridden wife versus the gleaming, healthy mistress. Eloise closed the door with a confident click. Sophia's fingers gripped the thin hospital blanket until her knuckles turned white. Brian didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed, as though her very existence was an inconvenience he'd been forced to endure. "Where have you been?" Sophia whispered, her voice cracking. Brian stepped aside, gesturing to the woman in the blue dress like she was a prize. "Stop whining, Sophia. I want you to meet Eloise," he said flatly, "my actual future." The words hit like a slap. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The monitor's rhythm quickened. Eloise stepped closer to the bed, her eyes scanning Sophia's swollen belly and pale, exhausted face with open disgust. She tilted her head, lips curling into a cruel smile. "Look at you," Eloise said, her voice dripping with venom. "Lying there like a beached whale. You really thought he'd stay with this?" She gestured at Sophia's body, her hand waving dismissively over the IV line, the hospital gown, the obvious vulnerability. Sophia's throat tightened. She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The doctors had been clear. No movement, no stress. She was a prisoner in her own skin. "Brian, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not here. Not now." He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching. Eloise laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the sterile walls. The monitor beeped faster. The baby kicked once hard, as if sensing danger. Eloise's hand moved to her waist, fingers working the buckle of the heavy black leather belt looped through her dress. The metal clinked as she pulled it free, the leather sliding out with a slow, deliberate hiss that made Sophia's stomach drop. "You think you can just lie here and keep him trapped?" Eloise said, her voice low and venomous. She folded the belt in half, snapping it taut between her hands. The crack echoed through the small room like a gunshot. Sophia flinched. Her hand instinctively moved to shield her belly. "Stop!" she gasped. "Please!" Eloise raised the belt high and brought it down hard against the metal bed rail. The sound was deafening. The entire frame shuddered. Sophia's body jolted despite her efforts to stay still, and the fetal monitor shrieked in response, the beeping spiking into a frantic alarm. "Brian!" Sophia cried out, her voice breaking. "Brian, stop her!" He stood there, leaning against the wall with his arms still crossed, watching the scene as some background noise. His expression was flat, almost bored. "She deserves it," he said coldly, "for being so damn boring, for trapping me with this." He gestured vaguely toward her pregnant form, his lip curling in disgust. Sophia's vision blurred with tears. The betrayal was complete. This wasn't just infidelity, it was cruelty, calculated and deliberate. She was helpless, confined to this bed, unable to run or fight or even scream without risking the life inside her. Eloise raised the belt again, this time aiming closer. Sophia turned her face away, sobbing, her hand pressed protectively over her stomach. The monitor continued its panicked mail. The room felt like a cage, the walls closing in. There was no escape, No one was coming. The door swung open with such force it slammed against the wall. Lawrence Ferguson stood in the doorway. He wasn't a large man. In fact, he looked almost unassuming. Average height, graying hair neatly combed, dressed in a simple purple vest over a collared shirt and slacks. He could have been mistaken for a retiree visiting a relative, someone harmless and forgettable. But his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, focused, and utterly calm. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. His daughter sobbing in the hospital bed, the shrieking monitor, the belt still clutched in Eloise's hand, and Brian standing uselessly against the wall. "Lawrence," Lawrence said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm here." Eloise turned, startled, then quickly recovered with a sneer. She looked him up and down, dismissing him entirely. "Who the hell are you? Get lost, old man. This is a private family matter." Lawrence didn't respond. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Brian straightened, his face hardening. "You heard her. Leave, Lawrence. You're not wanted here." He moved toward the older man, his posture aggressive, his hand outstretched to shove him back toward the exit. But when Brian's palm met Lawrence's chest, the older man didn't budge. Brian pushed harder. Lawrence stood firm, his feet rooted to the floor like he was carved from stone. His expression didn't change. No anger, no fear, just a quiet, unshakable resolve. "I said leave," Brian hissed, pushing with both hands now. Lawrence reached up, gently but firmly removing Brian's hands from his vest. His grip was controlled, measured, but undeniably strong. Brian stumbled back a step, shocked. "Touch me again," Lawrence said softly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "and you'll regret it." Eloise laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Who do you think you are?" Lawrence turned his gaze to her. His eyes were cold now, the calm replaced with something far more dangerous. "I'm the man who owns this hospital, and the ground you're standing on, and the building where you work, and the company that signs Brian's paychecks." The room went silent. Even the monitor seemed quiet, as if holding its breath. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Eloise's smirk faltered. Brian's face drained of color. "What?" Brian stammered, his voice cracking. You can't." "I can," Lawrence interrupted, his tone measured and precise. "I did. Last month I finalized the acquisition of Harmon Industries, your employer, Brian. I also happen to sit on the board of directors for this hospital and 3 others in the region, and as of 2 weeks ago, I purchased the commercial property where Eloise's boutique operates." He paused, letting the information settle like stones dropping into deep water. "So yes, I own quite a bit of the ground you both stand on." Eloise's fingers loosened around the belt. It slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Brian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His arrogance was crumbling in real time, replaced by something far more pathetic: fear. Lawrence pulled his phone from his vest pocket, calm and unhurried. He tapped the screen twice and held it to his ear. "Miss Chen, it's Lawrence Ferguson. I need you to initiate the following immediately." His voice was clinical, detached. "Full asset freeze on Brian Palacios, bank accounts, credit lines, investment portfolios, all of it. I also need immediate termination of his employment contract, effective now, no severance. Grounds, moral turpitude." Brian lunged forward. Wait, please, Mr. Ferguson, I can explain." Lawrence held up one finger, silencing him. He continued into the phone. "Also, contact my attorney. I want divorce papers filed on behalf of my daughter within the hour. Grounds, adultery and emotional abuse. Full custody, no visitation rights pending investigation." He paused, his eyes flicking towards Eloise. "And send security to room 407. There's been an assault. I want charges filed. Assault with a weapon, intimidation of a patient, and endangerment of a minor."
Eloise's face went white. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have," Lawrence replied, pocketing his phone. Brian dropped to his knees, hands clasped like a beggar. "Please, sir, I made a mistake. I didn't mean—" "You stood there," Lawrence said quietly, his voice colder than ice, "and watched while she threatened my daughter and grandchild. You encouraged it." He stepped closer, towering over the groveling man. "You're finished." The monitor's rhythm steadied. Sophia was still crying, but now with relief. Security arrived within minutes, 2 uniformed officers flanked by a stern-faced hospital administrator. They moved with swift efficiency, pulling Brian to his feet despite his desperate protests. "Please, Mr. Ferguson, I'll do anything." Brian's voice was shrill now, all traces of arrogance stripped away. His hands reached out, grasping at air. "I have nothing. I can't." "You should have thought of that then," the administrator said curtly, nodding to the officers. They each took one of Brian's arms and began escorting him toward the door. Eloise backed against the wall, her face pale, her earlier confidence completely shattered. "This is insane. You can't just—" "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the officers said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "There are charges being filed." "Charges? I was just—" "You assaulted a pregnant woman in a hospital bed," Lawrence said quietly. "There are cameras in this hallway, there are witnesses, and that belt is evidence." The second officer bent down, retrieving the black leather belt from the floor with a gloved hand, sliding it into a clear evidence bag. Eloise's eyes widened in horror. "No, wait!" She tried to push past them, but they caught her arms firmly. She thrashed once, then went limp, sobbing. "Brian, do something!" Brian didn't even look at her. He was still staring at Lawrence, his face a mask of broken desperation. The door closed behind them, and the room fell into blessed silence. Lawrence stood there for a moment, his shoulders finally sagging just slightly. He exhaled a long, slow breath, then turned toward the bed. Sophia was crying, but quietly now, tears of exhaustion, relief, and shame all mixed together. Her hands trembled as she wiped at her face. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen—" Her words broke off into a sob. "I chose the wrong man. I brought this into our lives. I'm so sorry." Lawrence crossed the room in 3 strides and sat gently on the edge of the bed. He took her hand in both of his grip warm and steady. "Sophia," he said softly, his voice full of tenderness, "you have nothing to apologize for. You loved someone. That's not a crime. What he did, what they did, that's on them, not you." "But the baby," Sophia's voice cracked. "What if—" "The baby is fine," Lawrence said firmly. He glanced at the monitor, which had returned to its steady rhythmic beep. "And the baby will be loved, by you, by me, by everyone who matters." He squeezed her hand. "We'll raise this child together, Sophia. You're not alone. You never were." Sophia collapsed into his arms, sobbing into his shoulder. Lawrence held her carefully, mindful of the IV line and the monitor wires, his hand smoothing her hair like he used to when she was small. "You're safe now, both of you, I promise." And for the first time in months, Sophia believed it.